In November 2025, a team of geophysicists published something that shouldn't have been possible: a direct reading of the moment Teotihuacan burned. Not from charcoal, not from pottery, from the Earth's own magnetic field, frozen into the city's floors on the day of the fire. And the date is wrong. Not by decades, by a full century. The fires that supposedly destroyed one of the largest cities of the ancient world were burning while roughly 125,000 people still lived there, at the very height of its power. If you've watched any documentary about Teotihuacan's violent end, the study you're about to see changes that story. A city doesn't burn down at its peak and keep going for another 100 years. Or does it? But before the new date makes sense, you need to see the old one. Because for decades, it looked airtight. If you like real archaeology instead of recycled myths, a quick tap on the like button helps me dig up more stories like this one. Here's the story archaeology settled on. Sometime between 550 and 650 AD, Teotihuacan died violently. Archaeologists call it the Great Fire. When René Milan mapped the city in the 1960s and 70s, he found burn damage in nearly every major structure along the Street of the Dead: temple staircases, platforms, palaces. And the destruction wasn't random. It was concentrated on state buildings, which is why Linda Manzanilla of Mexico's National University reads it as an uprising, a revolt against the ruling elite around 550 AD. The climate record seemed to agree. A stalagmite from a cave in southwestern Mexico preserves 2,400 years of rainfall history, and it shows drought setting in during exactly this window. Failing harvests, an angry population, burning government buildings. The story held together, and the evidence seemed to back every piece of it. There was just one problem, and it hid in plain sight. Nobody had ever dated the fire itself. The date came from pottery styles and construction layers, from things near the fire, never from the burned floors. That's where the new study begins. A team led by Karen Arreola Romero and Avto Gogu at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, working with colleagues from the University of Alberta and Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology, went after the fire directly. Their results appeared in the journal Quaternary. Their tool? Something called Archaeomagnetism, which turns a burned floor into a clock. It works like this. The clay and plaster of Teotihuacan's buildings are full of microscopic grains of magnetite, iron minerals that behave like tiny compass needles. At room temperature, they're locked in place, but heat them past about 550 degrees Celsius, around 1,020 degrees Fahrenheit, and the needles come loose. When the fire dies and the floor cools, they freeze again, all pointing at that day's magnetic north, all recording that day's field strength. And here's the useful part. Earth's magnetic field doesn't sit still. The magnetic pole drifts, measurably, decade by decade. And scientists have mapped that drift going back thousands of years. So a burned floor holds a timestamp. Match its frozen compass reading against the map of the wandering pole, and you can read the year the fire cooled, often to within a few decades. The team collected oriented samples from 6 burned buildings along the Street of the Dead, from the Square of the Moon down to the San Juan River. They had no other clock to lean on. No charcoal survived in these spots, so radiocarbon dating was off the table. That limitation is actually the strength of this study. Radiocarbon dates the things that burned. Archaeomagnetism dates the burning itself. 6 buildings. One question. When did the fires along the Street of the Dead actually happen? Quick status check, because this is where it pays off. You know the old story. One great fire, somewhere around 600 AD. You know the tool, floors that remember the day they burned. What you don't know yet is what 6 of those floors actually said. And the answer repeats, building by building, until the old timeline has nowhere left to stand. First, the team had to prove their compass needles hadn't been disturbed. Out of 74 samples, 60 gave clean, stable magnetic directions. And within each building, the directions agreed with each other to within about 3 degrees. That's a tight cluster. Floors that get dug up, flooded, or reburned don't do that. Then came the field strength test, a slow, brutal lab protocol called the Thellier method, where each sample is heated and cooled step by step dozens of times to extract how strong the magnetic field was on the day of the original fire. It's the same family of techniques used to date ancient kilns and even lava flows. 64 samples went in. 34 passed the quality bar. The rest were rejected. Thrown out, not massaged into the dataset. The surviving samples recorded ancient field strengths between roughly 39 and 53 microtesla, values that only fit specific points on the reference curves. In plain terms, each floor didn't just point at a date. It pointed twice, with direction and strength, and both readings had to agree. Now the timestamp could be read. The team matched their results against 3 independent references, a global model of the ancient magnetic field, and 2 regional curves built specifically for Mexico. 3 rulers, 1 measurement. Where the rulers disagreed, the date was thrown out. Where they agreed, the date stood. Here's what they agreed on. The square of the moon, burned between roughly 400 and 500 AD. The room of the columns, same window. The complex by the San Juan River, the superimposed buildings, the West Square. Again and again, the intervals came back to the same century. Not 550, not 600, 400 to 500 AD. The Colalpan phase, the exact period when Teotihuacan was at its maximum, with its biggest population ever and new murals still going up across the city. The fires everyone blamed for the city's death were burning during its golden age. And this isn't one lab's lonely result. In 2022, the same research group dated fire traces elsewhere in the city to between 327 and 441 AD. Decades earlier, archaeologist Daniel Wolfman had measured burned features at 3 other locations and gotten 310 to 475 AD. His numbers sat in the literature for years, quietly disagreeing with the textbooks, and almost nobody followed up. Now, the anomaly is the headline. 3 independent datasets, 2 generations of researchers, 1 early century. So what actually changes? The Great Fire, the single night of destruction that ends every documentary about this city, stops being a safe assumption. If major buildings along the ceremonial spine were burning a century before the collapse, then Teotihuacan's end may not have been an event at all. It may have been a process, a city smoldering on and off for 100 years through unrest and upheavals nobody wrote down, because this city left almost no readable history. And there's a stranger possibility. Some of these fires may not be destruction at all. The 2022 results hinted at repeated, deliberate burning, possibly ceremonial. In Mesoamerica, that has precedent. Ritual burning marked calendar cycles and building renewals. Some of what looks like a war zone may be liturgy. Now, what this does not change, and this part matters, it does not mean Teotihuacan fell in 450 AD. It didn't. The population decline, the abandonment, the newcomers squatting in the ruins around 600 AD, that timeline still stands on solid evidence. And the new dates have real opposition. At least 4 other dating studies on other buildings put fires a century later. Ana Maria Soler Arechalde's team dated stucco from the Hala Palace complex to 500 to 575 AD. Measurements at the Citadel came back at roughly 550 to 605. Fired clay from the Teopancasco neighborhood, 525 to 575. Both camps used serious methods, both published. The honest reading is that the literature is now split, and the disagreement itself is the discovery. Different clocks, measuring different fires in different parts of the city, are giving different centuries. That pattern is real, and nobody has explained it yet. The paper's authors are careful here, and it's worth quoting their caution. Destruction and depopulation, they write, may have begun earlier than previously recognized. May have. This is a live argument, not a settled verdict. Which leaves the question this study opens. If the Street of the Dead was burning around 450 AD while the city thrived, what were those fires? Ceremonies by a state at the peak of its confidence? The first flames of a revolt that took a century to finish the job? Or the opening chapter of the slowest collapse in the ancient world, one we compressed into a single dramatic night because the ruins made it look that way? One of the largest cities on Earth kept living and building on top of its own scorched floors for 100 years. Explaining that is the next decade of Teotihuacan archaeology. If this is how Teotihuacan died, you might want to know who its people actually were. We finally learned to read fragments of their language, and that video is on your screen now.